So the mark of the beast. This is something that's been talked about so much when people think about end times. It actually becomes quite entertaining to so many people. Why they've made Hollywood movies about this. And there are so many secular movies that don't have anything to do with God, theology, eschatology, or anything else, but they refer to it in entertaining ways. You know, they write it into the scripts. This mark of the beast, the Antichrist, the devil. But surprisingly, there are very few people that can actually tell you where it's found in the Bible, other than just they'll say, well, it's in the book of Revelation somewhere. Instead, like I said, most people get their theological understanding from pop culture, from Hollywood. And when I say most people, I mean Christians. I'm talking about Christians. I'm talking about people who call themselves Christians and who show up to church week after week. Most of those people, thank God that's not the case here. Thank God. I see some of you looking at me like, you crazy. I've been in my Bible. I know you have, and I'm thankful for that. But you know, there's so many people in America, so many people in so many churches, and it's especially prevalent in the mega church culture. I'm sorry, I don't mean to bash anyone else, but it's so prevalent, you know, where it can just become a social club, and we get our theology by watching TV. Instead of getting into the Word ourselves. And even among some Bible scholars and preachers, there are different ideas on the interpretation of this mark of the beast, even people that do know where it's found in the Bible. The prevailing view, at least here in America and in pop culture, is that the beast, when we say the beast, that we're talking about the Antichrist. I've seen so many movies and stories, like the Left Behind series, that view the Antichrist and the beast synonymously, and they think that the Antichrist is this individual. It's a person that is going to be shot in the head and appear to be dead and raised from the dead, and everyone will follow after him because he was miraculously healed. I don't want to give a spoiler to my sermon here, but let me just tell you, I'll give you a little spoiler right now. That's not true. That's just not true. It's silly, in fact. It's silly. And first, there have been a lot of people that were raised from the dead. In Jesus' time, there were people that were raised from the dead. You ever heard of Lazarus? Jairus' daughter, the widow there in the city of Nain. There have been people that have been raised from the dead here in our present day. Miracles still happen today. They didn't stop in the first century. In fact, one of the largest, greatest revivals in the history of the world is going on right now in China. Over 100 million people have come to Jesus in the underground church in China, in a place where they're being persecuted, where they can actually be thrown in prison or tortured and lose everything they own if they're even caught having their church services. Yet they continue to do it. And I'm not talking about one or two radical people. I'm talking about 100 million people. I've read a lot of articles on that, and they're still being persecuted even today. But if you read the articles, and you please study this for yourself, get online, read some articles. Information is so available today, there's no excuse for people not to avail themselves of it. Anyway, most of the people, something like 80% of the people they talk to in China, you know, why would you convert to Christianity when there are such high risks? Why would you even take part in this movement? I mean, we're not talking about a bunch of cults here. We're talking about 100 million people. And most of them, something like 80% of them, cite divine healing. Because in places where people have real faith, not coffee club faith, real faith, the kind of faith that they're willing to be persecuted for, the kind of faith that they're willing to come out of their sin and actually live by the things that they read, the real kind of faith that drives them to their knees to pray to a living God. I want to tell you, God still answers that kind of faith. And miracles still happen when people have that kind of faith. They really do. 80% of the people in that 100 million church movement will cite divine healing as their reason for coming to Christ. They've been touched by Him. They've been healed by Him. They've been transformed by Him in a tangible, visible, real, relevant way. A way that is real. That's still available to us here today. But so many Christians here in America our confidence is really in the healthcare system and the government. And, anyway, let me move on. So, I was saying that isn't true. That vision, that view of the Antichrist being a person that gets shot in the head and then rises from the dead, that's just not true. They take that view from the description of the beast in Revelation 13. So let me read that to you now. Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 through 18. Let's take a look at the passage and then we'll try to unpack it a little here in the next 30 minutes or so. So John is writing here in the book of Revelation chapter 13. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. By the way, the dragon is the devil. Verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given him over every tribe, every tongue and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Verse 9, if anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. All you preppers watching this online, and you think that you're preparing for the end of the world by loading all your guns and collecting ammunition. Listen, I'm not an activist against that by any means, but in fact, I support the Second Amendment rights and all that, but please don't think that that's somehow preparing for the end of the world. The passage here says, he who kills with the sword must also be killed with the sword. The way you prepare is you better know your God. But let me go on. So, he who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth. Pay attention to this part. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, and here's the passage about the mark of the beast. It's here starting in verse 16. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Verse 18, here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. Whenever they use terms like, here is wisdom, let him who hears understand, or who has an ear to hear, let him hear. Whenever you see that, what it's meaning is stop and think about this. There may be something here more than just a passing surface value of this. You might have to stop and think about this. There's a clue here, a clue to some bigger truth. There's wisdom here. So he says, here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. It is the number of a man. And his number is 666. King James Bible says 300. Or 600, 6. So first, in order to understand the mark of the beast correctly, we need to understand the passage correctly. If you're going to understand what the mark of the beast is, you need to know what the beast is. If you're going to understand the beast correctly, you need to understand the passage. Throughout Bible prophecy, you can go from the beginning all the way through. Throughout Bible prophecy, symbols of beasts and animals are used to illustrate countries, to represent countries, not people. Daniel's beasts. Daniel, in the dreams that he interpreted, he had a vision. He saw a vision of a goat, and that goat clearly was interpreted to represent the Greek Empire. The horns represent individuals, but the animals represent countries or empires. The ram that he saw represented the Medo-Persian Empire. He had visions of other animals later on, and they also represented empires. They're in Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 7. So, each one of the heads of this beast represent a country or an empire. So a multi-headed beast represents an alliance or an empire made up of several countries. Beasts do not, let me emphasize this, beasts do not represent individuals. The heads of the beast are countries. They're empires. They are not people. They are not individuals. Horns represent individuals or kings or presidents. We might get into that later, but right now we're talking about the beast. Who is the beast? Who is the mark of the beast? Verse 2 says, the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. The dragon is the devil. So, this beast is a great empire that rises up, and as this empire, this power, this world powerful superpower empire rises up, it's being motivated, it's being driven by the devil. It's being led by the devil, the Antichrist system. The people that run these governments are being influenced by spiritual forces, by spiritual wickedness in high places, the Bible refers to it as. So John says here in verse 3, I saw one of the heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. This is the passage that has inspired so much fantasy, so many movies and books about an Antichrist, individual person who rises from the dead or appears to do so. And all of those depictions are false. No such thing is being depicted here. No such thing is being prophesied here. No such thing is being implied here. This does not tell a story about anyone or anything rising from the dead first. First, he says it was wounded as if it had been dead, not that it was dead. So it receives a wound that is near death, but not death. He said it saw this wound, this head wounded as if it, the King James Version says, as if it was dead. And then he recovered. So whether it were individual or country, it's still not something that died. It's something that got hurt really bad and nearly died, but then recovers. But second, and more importantly, we need to remember that the beast is not a person or an individual, but it's an empire. So if the beast is an empire, which is normal in Bible prophecy, then each head also represents a country or an empire. So this verse cannot be talking about a man that was wounded and then recovers. The beast is not a man. The head that was wounded then would have to be a country or an empire that had fallen from power, was nearly finished, yet somehow this country recovers and resumes its status of power, its status of world dominance and influence. He said in verse 4 that the world would be saying, all the world would be saying, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with this beast? You don't make war with individuals, people. You make war with countries, nations. So if this passage is indeed referring to an empire instead of an individual, and then there are no other passages from where a person could get the idea of an antichrist who's wounded and recovers from the death or near dead, if it was referring to a person and not a country, then, by the way, it would seem to be a seven-headed person that we're looking for, wouldn't it? I've never seen a seven-headed person, have you? So, the description of a seven-headed beast, if it's referring to countries and nations, that makes sense. That makes sense. I can easily see an alliance of countries with seven heads, seven countries coming together. But a person, well, not so much. So let's talk for a second about Russia. There are very few possibilities for which this country could be. There are a few. But there are a couple of good reasons to consider Russia. I remember I read a book about 20 years ago. I really wish I could remember the author. I've got it on my bookshelf. I got to dig it out. But I read a book. It was the first time I had ever even considered the beast not being a person, because I bought right into the same Fantasyland teaching that everyone else was offering or seemed to be offering. But I read this book. It was right after the fall of the Soviet Empire. Right after the fall of the Soviet Empire, Russia was considered finished. It was like a third world country. I met some missionaries from Russia, the Mikhalskis, and spent some time with them. And I remember them telling me just how dreadful and dire the circumstances were over there, how poverty had spread through the nation, this once great superpower, and people were out of work and months behind. Even the government wasn't making their paychecks on time. The stock market had utterly collapsed. The money had failed. Why? They experienced hyperinflation. Overnight, these things happened, and all the world considered Russia to be pretty much finished. And during that time, the author of this book laid out this teaching, which I have so studied since then, about that the beasts are countries, not individuals. And his belief back then, 20 years ago, was, he said clearly, Russia is not finished. He believed that Russia was this head that was wounded and would recover. He said they're far from finished. They're still one of the largest landmass nation on earth. They still have vast resources, the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world, and they will recover, and they will come back very strong and very mighty, and they will be reestablished as a world power. Well, he was certainly right about that part. In fact, for the last several years, I'm not sure about last year, but a few years before, for several years in a row, Forbes magazine's list of the most powerful people on earth listed Vladimir Putin as the most powerful person on earth. It's amazing. Russia is far from finished, and their influence and power is growing after the fall of the Soviet Union. But he wrote that back when they were still in that bankrupt condition. So it caught my attention, and I've certainly studied it since and been watching. If Russia then, so he believed, and I concur, I believe that Russia most likely, better than any of the other possibilities on earth, most likely fits the bill for this head that was wounded as if it was dead and then recovered. But if that's the case, if Russia is that particular head, then who are the other six? Because this beast has 7 heads. Well, the good thing is the Bible has a lot of clues, and John talks about that over in chapter 17. There's been all kinds of speculation about that. There's been speculation that, in fact, so many commentaries that I read suggest that this beast is the ones that do see it as an animal, or I mean, as representing countries. So many commentaries view it as the world, the EU, the European Union, the EU coming together, and that's the beast. And so many others think it's the Roman Catholic Church. The beast is not the Roman Catholic Church. Sorry, folks. Sorry, there's several denominations that believe that. Sorry, that's not it. And we'll talk more about that during this series, but that's not it. So it's countries and powers. But in Revelation chapter 17, I'm just going to read this to you, 17 verse 8 through 13. And I know I'm covering a lot of teaching here, and this might be kind of dry and not very entertaining, but I really want to get the information to you. And it'll be on the video later. You can read it. So Revelation 17, the beast that you saw was and is not, and will ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And those who dwell on the earth will marvel, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast that was and is not and yet is. Here is the mind which has wisdom. Here we go again. Here is the mind which have wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. So the angel is speaking to John here, and he's going to tell him clearly what it means. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, of which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th, and is of the 7, is going into perdition. So here John has seen this vision of the great harlot on the back of the beast, and the angel spoke and said he would tell him the mystery of the woman. The beast comes out of the bottomless pit, out of hell. Remember, we already said that the beast gets his power and his authority from the devil. We also know that it comes up from the sea. This is not a contradiction, it's more of a clarification. The beast gets his power and authority from Satan and from hell. The sea, by the way, John said he saw this beast come up out of the sea. The sea represents, in Bible prophecy, it represents all the nations and the people of the earth. So this beast, this 7-headed beast, this nation, it's a nation or an empire that rises up out of all of the nations of the earth, striving against one another. As the nations, they fight wars and battles, and as they strive, like the waves of the sea, batter against one another. And out of all that striving rises up these powers, these nations, this beast. So the sea represents the nations. There's so many factors and forces working together even now that are driving the world toward this Antichrist system, just as they drive this beast into existence. So many people are deceived into thinking that this is simply party against party or country against country. It's China against the United States, or it's the Democrats against the Republicans. And we're all looking at all of those temporal worldly things instead of looking at the spiritual forces that are really behind it all. That the spiritual agenda, this spiritual wickedness in high places that are moving us day by day closer to this Antichrist system. In fact, these events are being very carefully orchestrated by these spiritual powers. Even this COVID-19 thing that's going on in the world is so lining up with the prophecies of the scriptures, bringing this beast up from hell, from the nation striving. So the 7-headed beast, he said the 7 heads are 7 mountains. Now again, in Bible prophecy, mountains often represent nations. Generally, specifically though, larger nations that ruled over other nations, as opposed to hills or isles that represent smaller nations that don't rule over other nations. Many examples of that. I'm going to run out of time before I can get through all this, but there are many examples of that in the Bible. Isaiah spoke of the mountains as being brought low and removed out of their place. He spoke of the Lord's house as a great mountain that would be exalted over all the other mountains. He also, when he establishes his millennial kingdom, God said there will be peace in all his holy mountain, his kingdom. It's another word for a nation or kingdom. Daniel pictured a rock there in chapter 2 of Daniel, I think, as he interpreted a dream. He pictured a rock that was cut without hands, and that rock grew until it became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. That's defined in Daniel chapter 2, verse 44. He said that this mountain, he said, in those days the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and that kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all those kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. That's the mountain of the Lord, his kingdom. So the angel further explains then these 7 kingdoms. Of them 5 have fallen, and one is yet to come. So if you're going to understand the identity of the beast, he gives us a great clue here. He says one of these 7 heads, these 7 kingdoms, he said one of them is. That means one of them was in power at that time, and 5 had already risen and fallen from power prior to that time. So I'm going to go real fast, but the one that was in power at that time is obvious, was the Roman Empire, or Italy. The other 5, you would look for the other 5 empires that had ruled over the biblical world through the Old Testament of the Bible and had persecuted the Jews during the time before then that had fallen from power. That would be Egypt, Assyria, which is now Syria and Turkey and parts of Iraq, Babylon, which is now Iraq, Persia, which is Iran, and Greece. So if this view is correct, then this 7-headed beast would be an alliance of these 6 nations along with the one that had not yet come at that time, that one being Russia. Now, this is a theory. I'm not dogmatic on it. I'm pretty sure it's correct. But take note. Take some notes. Somebody write it down. Because right now, there may be competing theories, and there may be some people that think otherwise. So we don't really know. I believe I've been studying these things for 20 years, and so many of the things that I expected 20 years ago have just been coming to pass. I don't think I'm wrong about this one either. But there's one way to find out. Write it down. And while we may not know with certainty today, one thing you can be absolutely certain of: when you see the alliance of these 6 nations come together with that one thing you can be very, very certain of: that is the beast of Revelation. You don't have to wonder about it then. You don't be so silly as to say, it's just a coincidence. Don't be so ignorant as to think, wow, it just happens to work out that way. There are so many factors and forces coming together. By the way, I don't have time to get into it yet, but study the relations of Russia with each of these other 6 countries and see which direction it is headed. It is too much to just be a coincidence. So, another reason to believe that this alliance is led by Russia is its power. John said, the whole world marveled at this beast and said, who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with the beast? So whatever this alliance of nations is, it has to have superpower status then. Verse 7 says it was granted with him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given him over every tribe and tongue and nation. This nation, this empire, is going to become so incredibly powerful that it is hard to imagine anyone other than just a couple of nations fitting that bill. The head that was wounded and recovered is obviously the dominant head here. They worshiped the first beast, verse 12 says, whose deadly wound was healed. So there are really only 3 nations on planet Earth that could possibly fit that description right now. Only 3 that could possibly have so much power that they are actually of superpower status. I mean, it's not France. It's not Spain. Only 3. The United States, Russia, and China. These are the only nations on the whole earth that could possibly have that much power. There are several reasons why it's not likely to be China or the United States. 1, the alliances with the other 6 nations are far more likely to fit Russia and the alliance and the relations that they have with those countries now than either of the other 2. 2, neither of those nations, neither the United States nor China, were nearly gone and then recovered. And 3, China is much more likely to fit other end-time roles in prophecy. Maybe we'll talk about some of those later. And 4, the U.S. is more likely to fit another role in this prophecy. So if you rule out the United States and China, there really is only one nation left on the earth that could fit the role of this head that was wounded and then recovered. Next, I want to talk to you about, I'm going to get to the mark of the beast part, I hope, the second beast. So much has been written about the first beast, entertainment, most of it. So many people get so excited about all the ramifications of that and who the Antichrist is, that you almost never hear anybody mention the second beast. Listen, the second beast is every bit as prominent in this passage as the first beast. And it is every bit as significant to the mark of the beast as the first beast. In fact, if you'll go back and read that passage again, you will find that it's the second beast that causes everyone to have to receive the mark of the beast, not the first beast. It's the second beast that has the power to do that. In fact, what John said here, he said, I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. You may recall the first beast rose up out of the sea. And we talked about the sea representing the striving of nations, one against another, the striving of all the peoples of the earth. The second beast rises up out of the land. In other words, the second beast, if beasts represent nations, then this second beast is a nation that did not rise up through the striving of other nations against one another. It didn't rise up in a place where other nations already were. This is a nation that probably rose up where nations weren't already, where there wasn't already an organized system of government and such. That's narrowing the list down pretty far of who that could be. The second beast didn't rise from the sea. He also said that this second beast exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. He causes the whole earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. So the second beast is someone that has all of the power of the first beast. The second beast also must have superpower status. Now, we've already established that there were only 3 nations that could be the first beast, and if we think one of them is Russia, that only leaves 2. There are only 2 possibilities for who this second beast could be. It could be the United States and it could be China. It could not be, and it is not likely to be anyone else. It has to have superpower status. It has to have all of the power of the first beast. What nations on earth, if you could imagine Russia, the great Russian Federation, and these other 6 countries with them, and maybe other smaller countries, it doesn't have to be limited to the 7. But if you imagine that kind of an alliance and the power that they would have, now who would have enough power to equal that, to at least equal that? Only 2 possibilities. So if we are correct, then this next beast is either, this second beast is either the United States or China. Now, I don't believe that it could be China. There are several reasons that I don't believe that. I don't want to believe that it's the United States. Oh, I've read so many articles and books, and so many preachers of today, especially American preachers, especially prosperity preachers and stuff, talk about the great America and how the church is going to be strong, and we're going to be the light of the world during these end times, and I'd sure like that to be true. But first, let's list a couple of the reasons why I don't believe that it's China. The second beast, by the way, is aligned with Russia. It represents the Antichrist. The second beast represents it is in league with the first beast. That's with Russia. So now that really makes sense that it should be China and not the U.S. We're kind of rivals with Russia, and China and Russia seem to get along, both being communist states and all that. But there's a 200 million man army that comes to battle against the Antichrist at the Battle of Armageddon. That 200 million man army is marching from the east, according to the Bible. That's probably not the United States. That most likely, in my opinion, is going to be China. So most likely that's not the ally of the Antichrist or the beast. China also has a history of multiple dynasties and conquests and governments going all the way back to 4000 BC. So this is more like a nation that rose up out of the sea also, and not one that rose up out of the earth. Also, this second beast is called a false prophet. The second beast, if you'll read through Revelation, is defined as the false prophet, which would hardly describe China, but it might well describe the United States. You say, well, wait a minute, Pastor Bill. China's not one of the good guys. Oh, no, they're not. But they also don't claim to represent God. What does a prophet do? A prophet speaks for God. A prophet claims to be godly. A prophet claims to speak for the Lord, about the Lord, one who speaks for God, one who represents God. China is officially an atheist nation. They persecute Christians openly. They persecute other religions openly. They don't claim to represent any God. That doesn't really fit the bill of a false prophet then. The U.S., on the other hand, is thought of throughout the world as a Christian nation, especially historically. It presents itself as benevolent and peaceful. The Bible says this thing looks like a lamb but has a mouth like a dragon. Well, it seems then that the most likely candidate for this second beast to me would be the United States. The problem with this view is that it would require an alliance to some degree, between the U.S. and Russia. You know, up until the last presidential campaign, I thought that this was still maybe some ways off. And that was when, I'm going to be honest with you, that was when I absolutely knew that we were so much closer than we thought, so much closer. I remember when they told me that, and I don't want to come across as being supportive of either Republican or Democrat politics here. I'm a Republicrat, and I don't have to, especially from this pulpit, the only thing I have to do is serve Jesus. So if my views approve or disapprove of one party candidate or another, it's really only because of the way I see it in line of this Bible, not because they represent one party or the other. But when someone told me that Donald Trump was running for president, honestly, I thought it was a joke. I really did. I said, there's no way that he's ever going to win. I just didn't think that could even be possible. But then as the campaign clicked along, I remember when I first noticed all of the complimentary things that he had to say about Russia and about Vladimir Putin and about the possibility of maybe even ending NATO and things like that. And then the things that Putin said about him. And I instantly changed my opinion about halfway through that campaign. And I said, he absolutely is going to be elected. Because at that point, I saw that this is fulfilling Bible prophecy at an amazing rate. And it's going to continue. It's going to continue. Now, do I think that Donald Trump is the false prophet? Probably not. There'll probably be a leader or two after him, maybe. But he is definitely the one that has turned the train in the other direction. And we are definitely moving toward that alliance more than away from it. The Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. So now that we understand who the beast is, we can talk about what the mark of the beast is and what it represents. Now, to do that, it's going to take me about, to be honest, about another 15 minutes to do that justice. I could skip through it in 5 minutes, or I could take another 15 minutes. So I can take the 15, or I can bring it back next week. Okay, I'll take the 15. I want to check with y'all. So, the mark of the beast. Now we understand who the beast is. Now that we've established that, it says he causes all people, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who understands calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That's Revelation 13, 16 through 18. So it's the second beast that requires everyone to have this mark. And pay attention here, the purpose of the mark of the beast has nothing to do with worshiping the devil. I've heard so many people say, I'll never take the mark, they'll never make me worship the devil. I would never worship the devil. I'm never taking the mark of the devil. Well, I'm sure that very few people are going to take the mark of the devil. The mark of the beast is not a mark that represents allegiance with the devil. It doesn't even represent allegiance with the beast. It might be brought about by him, and in that respect, it's the mark of the beast. But that's not the reason people take the mark of the beast. The Bible tells us clearly here why people take the mark of the beast. They take it because without it, they can't buy or sell anything. The mark of the beast is about money. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with worship. Nobody's going to say, okay, I renounce Jesus, so here, give me my mark. In fact, most of the people taking the mark won't be thinking about Jesus at all. He won't even come into their minds. They won't think that they've done anything wrong. It has nothing to do with the devil. And we're told to use wisdom here. He said, here is the wisdom. Here is wisdom. My God, people have just so departed from wisdom in so many places. Think about this. People won't be getting the mark because they want to worship the devil. It's because they have to buy and sell. Now, there's been all kinds of speculation over the years, over the centuries, and especially over the last 100 years about what this mark might be. So many false alarms. Why people used to write, and told church denominations would say, well, it was the Social Security number, and nobody would get a Social Security number because they thought it was the mark of the beast, because you got to have a Social Security number to open a bank account, so they're controlling what you buy or sell. So that's the mark of the beast, the Social Security number. Or it's this other, maybe it's credit cards, somehow credit cards are moving us toward the mark of the beast, or it's bank accounts, so we're not going to get those. Well, those are all false alarms. With all of those things, it was still possible for people to buy and sell. You can not have the Social Security number, and you can still buy and sell stuff. Just ask any illegal immigrant. Oh, I didn't go there, did I? But, people can fake Social Security numbers. People can fake all kinds of ways, but you can still buy and sell stuff. I remember when I first read this, I thought I understood quickly that the mark that this would have something to do with buying and selling, and I understood that it would have some way of electronic transactions. It would have something to do with the government monitoring and controlling all of our electronic transactions. So 20-some years ago, I trained myself immediately to start using cash. I said, well, I can solve that easy. I'll just get in the habit of using cash for all my purchases. I'll buy things with cash. So I did. I stopped using credit cards. I stopped writing checks. I started paying cash for everything that I could pay cash for. I always carry some cash on my person so that I'd buy my gasoline with cash. I'd buy just about everything with cash, never hardly pull a credit card out. I did that for years until I understood how it's really going to work. It's got to be a system that allows the government to track all purchases. About 2015, I began to really understand how this is likely to work and how it's likely to come to pass. I became so certain of this that I actually began to make a couple of predictions, and so far every one of them are right on track. Some of you may remember that back in 2015, I predicted that by the end of 2022, before the end of 2022, there won't be such a thing as cash on the earth. And that is the way that the mark of the beast will be implemented, is because the government first will outlaw cash. As long as cash exists, the mark of the beast can't fully be implemented because people will still be able to buy and sell. They may not be able to buy and sell conveniently, but they will be able to do it. They will be able to accomplish that. But the Bible says that everyone, not just some people, everyone are going to be affected, and that unless they have it, they're not going to be able to buy and sell. Now, I know that puts a real twist on it, especially if you think you're going to be here during that time, as we believe we will. As long as there's a method, like using cash, that we can use to get around this system, then the prophecy hasn't been fulfilled. But the governments will accomplish this. They'll do what I hadn't even thought of 20 years ago. They're going to completely abolish cash. Now, some of you may think that's crazy, and some of you, we've talked before, and you realize that's not only crazy, but it's already happening. I started talking about that back in 2014 and 15. There's actually been an absolute war on cash by governments and banks for the last decade, at least a decade now. First started out as optional, but more and more, it's becoming mandatory. Started out where you had the choice of doing automatic deposits, and now many people don't have the choice. I remember thinking why they could never do that, because people in poverty, they don't even have credit cards. And then that was the first people they switched over, because they also don't have choice. They just said you get your benefits on this card. They got them used to it right away, because they don't have the choice to say, oh, well, I don't think I like that system. Then it becomes mandatory more and more. I've mentioned this several times over the years. You might recall I mentioned that in Europe, many places in Europe, places like France, it's actually illegal to have a transaction right now over a certain amount in cash. I think it's over $1,000. Anything over $1,000 can't be in cash. It's actually illegal. It's actually illegal to carry more than a certain amount of cash on your person in many of those countries in the European Union right now. On November 8th, 2016, does anybody remember what happened on November 8th, 2016? Does anybody remember that? November 8th, 2016. Oh, come on. That was the election. That's right. That was the day that Donald Trump was elected. Something else happened on that day. Something happened in India on that day. Now, this had been planned out for months in advance, actually for more than a year in advance. It took a year or so to get everything in place to do this. And it was announced on November 8th, 2016. The reason that it was announced on November 8th, 2016, I believe, is because everyone knew that the entire world news cycle would be reporting on the United States election, and this would just be a little headline that nobody would read or pay attention to, and they were largely correct. But India is the second most populated country on the earth. And in India, they have rupees instead of dollars. And at that time, 80% of all of the cash in India was in either 1,000 rupee bills or 500 rupee bills. Now, a 1,000 rupee bill is worth about $13. That's about the equivalent of $13. And on November 8, 2016, they announced in India, the second most populated country in the world, that at the end of that year, they gave them about less than 2 months' notice, all 500 and 1,000 rupee bills would become worthless. And everybody in the country had until the end of the year to deposit them in banks or exchange them. Could you imagine if somebody came along and said there aren't going to be any more 20s and hundreds, or 20s, 50s, or hundreds in America from now on? Only 5s and 10s? Cash might still be legal, but it would become a whole lot less convenient. This was a huge deal in India. It caused the shrinking of the whole GDP for that year. It caused many people to go bankrupt. People that had, and people had to prove how they got their money. If they had a large sum, they had to prove how they got it, or the government would take it. Now, right now in India, It's illegal for you to possess more than 10 of those bills. You can have 10 of them as souvenirs, but if you have, which remember they're only worth $13, so 10 of them's worth $130. If you have more than that, it's illegal to complete any transaction using those notes. If you complete a transaction with those notes, you can go to jail or have fines. If you are caught with them in your possession, you can go to jail or be fined. So they have already outlawed a good part of the cash there in India. So don't think that these things can't happen soon. In the wake of COVID-19, I predict that the time scale is only going to get faster. I predicted back then that by the end of 2022, cash would be a thing of the past here in our country too. I said back then, some of you may remember, go back through some of my old sermons, they're all available somewhere. But I said that there's going to be some crisis, some catalyst that is used to accomplish this. And the government will put these things in effect to protect us and to help us. Those are the things that I said. Well, here we are. I don't know how many news articles you've seen or media articles about how important it is to pay with a cash or with a touchless method. Use a touchless method to pay, and how many germs can be passed from hands to hand by passing out those bills. Folks, it's coming. It's coming very, very quickly. Now, the end of cash in itself is not the mark of the beast. Once all transactions are forced to be electronic, and they will be soon, once that happens, then there's only one more step that's necessary. It's going to become necessary to have a way to prove your identity and to prevent anyone else from posing as you. That's going to become very necessary. If every transaction on earth is done electronically, if it's not possible for me to just hand you a $20, you won't even be able to put a $20 bill in the collection plate. You're going to have a way of using electronic payment to pay your tithe if you're going to pay your tithes. There won't be such a thing as money. But the biggest problem we'll have then will be identity theft. Because if somebody could get your identity, why, they'd have access to everything. You can't have any money in the mattress that they can't get to. You can't have any money in your safe that they can't get to. So you're going to have to be protected from that. And the way to protect you is going to be with a digital identity. That's the only way. I've been saying this since 2015. And in the wake of COVID-19, it's going to come even faster. They're going to attach some other things to it. Imagine if you had a digital identity. Imagine if every single person on earth could have a digital ID that was better than your driver's license, better than your passport, that could absolutely prove who you were and would be absolutely impossible to duplicate or counterfeit. Absolutely impossible. That no one could steal your identity. And you could make it electronic so that it would be very, very simple to access any terminal anywhere and gain access to all of your stuff, but nobody else could. If you could make a system like that that was completely impossible to counterfeit, then you could be protected. You could be protected from identity theft, but everybody else could be protected also, because we could attach your medical records to that and make sure that you've been vaccinated. We could attach any other records we want to it to make it available for your convenience or for the protection of people. Now, that may sound far-fetched, but if you'll check out something called ID2020.org, it's a website, ID2020.org. ID2020.org is a huge coalition of governments and companies founded by Microsoft and the United Nations. These are big players. This isn't conspiracy theory stuff. This is their website. ID2020.org. They started this over 5 years ago, and their goal is to provide a digital ID for every person on planet Earth. I'm talking about from the most remote tribe in southern Sudan to the highest penthouse in New York City. They intend to establish a digital ID for every person on the planet. One of the things that it says on their manifesto is they believe that every person on the planet has the right to prove their identity. It'll just take a little step to go from right to obligation to prove their identity. And they don't believe that the national systems, that the government systems are adequate to do that. They believe that there has to be a system that transcends governments, so that your ID is your proof of ID is just as valid in Switzerland as it is in Africa or South America or any other place that you go. It transcends national borders. You'll no longer need passports, driver's licenses, credit cards, IDs, anything else. You can access everything through this digital ID. This is already being accomplished. Already. There are governments, the United Nations, huge companies like Microsoft that have signed on and putting billions of dollars behind this. It's a global movement transcending all nationalities. Now, compare that to the statement. He said, "Here is wisdom. Let everyone understand. It is the number of a man." It's not the number of the devil, it's the number of a man. It's the number, the identifying thing that identifies each person. I believe that the mark of the beast is going to be a computer chip of some type that will be implanted in us to link to this digital ID. And it will be absolutely impossible, completely impossible to counterfeit. One more thing that I'll mention here, bioelectricity. Sometimes I don't have time I'm out of time, so I don't have time to define the term, but look it up sometime, bioelectricity. But the scientists have determined that every single one of our bodies, we're all familiar with the concept of DNA. You have DNA, and it identifies each and every one of us uniquely. We also have a biorhythm, bioelectricity. Our bodies communicate electrically. Our brain communicates through our nervous system with very, very small amounts of electricity. But this electricity has a unique signature, a unique frequency, if you will, that is unique to every single person on the planet. It is not far-fetched at all to think that there's going to be a computer chip, or there already is, that can identify your bioelectric signature as opposed to everyone else's. So if you have a chip that was available to you that was uniquely tuned to your bioelectricity, then it would be totally impossible to counterfeit. I could cut off your hand and try to put that chip in mine to pretend to be you, but it wouldn't work for me because it's only tuned to you. Your bioelectric signature is in the database along with that digital ID. Talk about the amazing system. How would anybody not want this? I mean, unless, of course, you're a Christian that believes that it's the mark of the beast, but most of those folks believe that they'll be raptured away before this happens. So when it comes, they'll think, well, it couldn't be me because I'm still here. Should have been here last week. It'll be able to code and sync with us on a DNA level. That, my friend, is the mark of the beast. Now again, just like I was saying on this alliance of nations, this is a theory. I can't prove it right now. But if you see this alliance of nations come together and you know that that is the beast, and if you see the relations with the U.S. and Russia getting closer and closer as I've predicted, and you see, then you know that we are the second beast, as I've described, then you must know that when this happens, yes, that is the mark of the beast. Don't be foolish. If none of those other things come to pass, well then throw this out too. If nothing else lines up with that, well, but when you see it all coming together, don't take the convenient path just because it's convenient, my friends. The Bible says anyone that takes that mark is also damned. You see, I also believe that this mark, that this chip will have the ability not only to identify you, but also to some degree to control you, to affect you. Don't think that can't happen. The Army has already developed, and look these studies up. Please don't take my word for it. Search this out. They've already designed computer chips that they can implant in one's brain to treat them for PTSD. In other words, to affect them on an emotional level. That's pretty significant to me. That already exists right now. These things will happen. I believe they're going to happen in the next couple years. These are not decades off. I talked about this stuff 20 years ago. It was decades off. I remember the other day thinking, my God, I can't believe this is happening so soon. And then all of a sudden I realized, no, it's not soon. I've been talking about this for 20 years. I just got older. It's here. These are happening. The Bible is certain. Even if it doesn't happen as quick as I think, it will happen. The Bible is certain. No one can stop it. No one can prevent it. No one can make it happen. But it will happen. Anyone who receives the mark is damned. There's not going to be a rapture to escape this stuff. It will require faith and it will require perseverance, a willingness to be faithful unto the end. Jesus said, he that endures to the end, the same will be saved. There'll still be some people who the Lord preserves through this time, though. The Bible says they that do know their God will be strong and do exploits. Just as God led his people through the plagues of Egypt and preserved them, he'll be able to preserve you. He's not going to preserve you through your AK-47 or your 50 cal. He's going to preserve you through faith and trust in his name. He that does know his God. Many others will be martyred for their faith. But this is not something that we should fear, like I said here in the beginning. Instead, we should set our mind on those things which are above, not on those things which are below. Instead of thinking about death, like I said, I'm thinking about life. Instead of thinking about the tribulation, I'm thinking about the millennial kingdom. Instead of thinking about the beast and the mark of the beast, I'm thinking about Jesus and his throne here on earth. I'm thinking about the lion eating grass with the ox. I'm thinking about the wolf that lies down with the lamb. I'm thinking about the children that'll be able to play on a cobra's den. I'm looking forward to the peace throughout God's kingdom on earth. I'm looking forward to these good things. And I want to tell you, whatever you have to go through to get there, as Paul said, he said, I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not even worthy to be compared to the glory that God has prepared for you.